In the old German tellings collected by the Brothers Grimm, not every monster wears claws. Some wear the face of the person beside you at supper. This is one of the smaller tales in their books, and one of the most honest. It does not teach you how to slay a dragon. It teaches you what envy does when no one is watching. A wild boar was ravaging the king's forest. The king proclaimed that whoever brought the beast down would receive a reward fit for a hero. Many men heard the proclamation. 2 brothers heard it and heard different things. The younger was fair-haired and open-handed. The older was dark-eyed and careful with his smiles. They set out together because brothers often do, and because the older knew the younger was the better hunter. That knowledge sat in him like a stone in a boot, felt with every step, never named aloud. If you remember anything, remember a bridge over a brook, a bone white as frost, and a horn that refused to stay silent when the truth had been buried. The tale is short by the standards of kings and dragons. That is why it lasts. Envy does not need a castle to ruin a house. The forest the king feared was not enchanted. It was simply old, oaks thick enough to hide a man's conscience, paths that turned back on themselves, silence that listened. The brothers walked until the older complained of his feet, and the younger offered water from his flask without being asked. At a clearing, they met a little man in a gray coat with a beard like brushed moss. He asked for a drink. The younger gave it gladly. The older turned his face away as if kindness were a tax he refused to pay. The little man nodded at the younger and said, "Your courtesy will be remembered when the boar comes." They went on. The older muttered that beggars should not prophesy. The younger said nothing, because he had learned that arguing with envy only feeds it. Above them, crows moved like punctuation across a gray sky. When the boar broke cover at last, it was not a beast from a tapestry. It was muscle, tusk, and fury, the kind of animal that makes heroes honest about their chances. The older brother climbed a tree. The younger stood his ground. The boar charged. The younger sidestepped the way hunters learn or die and drove his spear into the shoulder where bone meets breath. The beast turned, furious and still standing. A second pass. A third. The little man in gray appeared at the edge of the fight as if he had been there all along and pointed to the soft place behind the ear. The younger struck true. The forest exhaled. The older climbed down slowly, already calculating. He praised his brother with words that did not warm anything. He looked at the carcass and saw a crown in every drop of blood. The younger wiped his face and said they should go back before night made fools of honest men. They dragged the boar as far as the path allowed. The older offered to run ahead for help. The younger said they would rest at the bridge first. He did not know he was naming the place where his story would fork. Brothers share roads. They do not always share what they intend to do when the road empties. The bridge was stone and narrow, arching over a brook that had cut the same groove through the valley for more years than the king's line. Water spoke below. The younger leaned on the rail to drink. The older stood behind him with a club hidden in his cloak. One blow. That is how quickly a life can end when greed has been rehearsing. The younger fell without a speech. The older dragged him under the bridge, into the damp dark where roots hung like forgotten names, and buried him shallow in the mud and stones. He washed his hands in the brook. He took the boar. He practiced the face of a grieving survivor all the way to the palace gates. Grief is easy to perform when you have already decided what you are buying with it. The brook kept moving. It did not testify. It did not need to yet. Some truths wait for a voice that has not been made. The older brother stood before the king with mud on his boots and a story about a tragic accident in the wood. He said the boar had killed his younger brother, brave, noble, gone. The court murmured the way courts do when a prize and a funeral arrive in the same hour. The king looked at the boar. He looked at the man. A promise is a dangerous thing in the mouths of kings, but this one had been shouted from the steps. The princess was brought out, pale and proud, and the older brother bowed as if he had earned her with honor instead of theft. Feasts followed. Songs were sung that praised a hero who was not in the hall. The younger brother lay under the bridge and listened to none of it, because the dead have only the patience of bones. Years are lighter on the living. The older brother became a man of standing. He learned to sleep through most nights. He did not learn to forget the bridge. No murderer ever fully does. Seasons turned until the story of the Boar was old news and the bridge was simply the bridge again. A crossing for shepherds, peddlers, and boys who threw stones into the brook to hear the splash. One shepherd, leading his flock to a lower pasture, saw something white in the mud where the arch met the bank. He thought at first it was a stone polished by water. He pulled, and the earth gave up a bone long and clean, bright as a piece of moon someone had dropped and forgotten. He did not know whose bone it was. He knew only that it was beautiful in the way useful things sometimes are. He took it home and carved a mouthpiece for his herding horn, because a shepherd's hands are never idle and the bone fit the knife as if it wanted to be shaped. That evening, he blew the horn to call his dog across the hill. The note that came out was not a note. It was a beginning. The horn began to sing. Not a melody a man could hum, but words, clear, cold, and exact. It sang of a younger brother struck from behind at the bridge. It sang of a boar stolen and a grave made in mud. It sang of a princess won with blood that was not the boar's. The shepherd's hands shook on the horn. His wife crossed herself. Neighbors came to the door because sound carries farther than secrets. By morning, the village knew what the bone remembered, and by noon, someone had run with the horn toward the king's court. There, before the throne where the older brother now sat among the honored, the shepherd lifted the horn and blew once. The hall fell silent, the way a hall falls silent when truth enters wearing no disguise. The horn sang again. It did not accuse with anger. It accused with the terrible patience of something that had waited years to be heard. The princess covered her mouth. Courtiers who had flattered the older brother an hour earlier now could not look at him. The king gripped his armrest as if the throne itself needed steadying. No one in the hall had asked for a song. The bone had brought one anyway. The older brother rose with a face like wet clay. He denied everything. He called the horn a trick, the shepherd a liar, the bone a fraud. But the horn sang on, and each verse fit the bridge, the brook, the brother, the boar, until even the king could not pretend the song was fiction. Justice in these tales is not gentle. The man who buried his brother for a prize was buried in turn where murderers were buried then, without song, without crown, without the princess who had never been asked whether she wanted to marry a ghost's keeper. The shepherd kept the horn for a time, then laid it in the church as people lay things that have done their work. The bridge remained. The brook remained. Travelers crossed without knowing what they walked above, which is how the world carries most of its stories. The Grimm brothers wrote this tale down so envy would not look like an accident when it repeats. If you remember anything, remember that some bones do not rest because they are polite. They rest when the lie is finished. This was Forgotten Fables. This was the singing bone. The German folk tale of murder, a horn, and the truth that refused to stay buried.